Okay, anytime you're ready.
Okay. Hi, kids. Welcome to On the Marquee Deep Dive. This is a podcast where we dive deep into a film. Once we are fully buried within the film, we use that as an opportunity to dig around and find a topic to discuss. So for this episode, we are talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we may be using that as an opportunity to talk about capitalism, automation, the replacement of the workforce in the name of efficiency, and maybe some other things. I have a panel with me to help me discuss this today in alphabetical order. First, I have the Dirty Hippie, Michael Cast. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So this is a horror film. You are not a horror fan?
I'm not a horror. I'm not a horror.
You're not a horror
fanatic.
either?
I'm a horror.
Oh, okay.
I'm a media horror.
Thanks for clarifying.
But I'm not a horror fan at all.
But you are a fan of capitalism.
Well, we can talk about that.
Okay, we'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay. And then next up is Neil Godbout. Hey, Neil.
Hi.
So I was a little surprised when you messaged the other day and said that you hadn't seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre yet.
It was just one of those films that, I was a teenager in the glory days of VHS, right? And going to the store and when I say glory days, I guess I should say, right, that golden age of the early mid 80s where, right, the stores were popping up and you would go and you would get these films, but of course, and so there was a lot of 70s films, but the horror movies that I watched were more timely. The Fly, American Werewolf in London, and I never really went back to look at Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was just like, it was out there and I would see it, but I just never got to it until this morning.
Well, that's true, because sort of there was the boom of VHS in the 80s coinciding with this comedy and horror boom. So there's so much current stuff to consume.
Yeah.
I'm guessing a lot of people probably didn't go back. And then there's the whole box art and everything for horror films that was like the thing that grabs you. But so hadn't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What was I going to ask you? Oh, have you ever sat around the dinner table and howled while somebody screamed in terror?
No.
No. All right.
I do get the humor that's baked into a lot of horror, that it becomes so ridiculous that you just have to laugh.
Yeah, it goes so far.
I do get that. Although watching this film for the first time, the one thing that I felt that was actually quite absent from this movie was a sense of humor.
Really? I think so. I think there is a few moments that are purposely funny, or I find funny anyways because it's so dark. And we'll get to that. But yes, this is there's not a lot of letting off steam. It's kind of full pedal to the metal.
Yeah, Toby Hooper grabs you and doesn't let go. There's a relentlessness to this film,
right?
The first half hour is a slow burn, and then the next 55 minutes is
it's a race to the finish.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, even it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Each word is doing a lot more heavy lifting than the one before it, and then the poster is, who will survive and what will be left of them? Which I think is another reason maybe that there's a lot of people with just the reputation of the film, and those two things alone probably haven't seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like Michael.
And Michael, I can assure you that as far as gore goes, and you've seen far worse.
Yeah.
This movie was made so cheaply that it had to actually hide or and not so much hide, but it doesn't rub your nose in it because they simply didn't have the budget to
And I think
do.
wasn't the rating board a little more stringent as well?
Well,
Like would it have?
Well,
would it have
okay, so-
garnished-
Terrence can address that
So-
in terms of.
So
yeah.
Toby Hooper set out. He says this at various times for production, and I'm going to say some things. So take what Toby Hooper says with a grain of salt. But he says that he would call the ratings board and ask them things like, "How do I hang a woman on a meat hook and still get a G rating?"
a G?
Yes. So he was aiming for a G, or he'd take a PG. What he wanted was the lowest possible rating he could get, so the most possible people could see the film, because he had made films before this that nobody saw. And so that's part also against that is why he's trying to make it so shocking, because he wants to be, hey, look at me, look at this, look at what I did. At the same time, he wants as many people to look at this, look at me, look at what I did. So it's not a bloody movie at all. It relies on that old horror trope of what your imagination imagines is far worse than what they could put on screen. Whether or not that's intentional by Toby or the people who helped make the movie, that is up for debate. But so let's get into it, and let's talk about our director. He's credited as the director, and with the screenplay, and with producing, and with some of the sound. Toby Hooper. So Toby Hooper was born January 25th, 1943 in Austin, Texas, which is sort of the outlaw renegade part of Texas, right?
Well, also these days it's the artsy fartsy part of Texas.
Right, keep Austin weird. And Toby's a little bit of a hippie himself, but I think he's more in line with hippie like Willie Nelson, who's from Austin, Texas. Right, so he's a country hippie.
Yeah, an outlaw hippie. Okay, I get that.
Hippie. So this is an outlaw hippie movie.
You're kind of guy, Michael.
Yeah.
I used to be called the angry hippie.
The angry hippie?
Yeah.
Is that what should be
Or the
called?
angry Buddha.
The angry Buddha. So Toby claims that he made films as early as age 3. He also claims that he sometimes says he used his father's Super 8 camera. He sometimes says he made a film with his father's Super 8 camera with his father at the age of 9. And he also claims, and this one can be verified, that he made a full film with sound and everything. It's a short film, actually. At the age of 16, that can be verified. There is a film that he made at that time titled The Abyss. Toby claims that his parents owned a chain of hotels. Sometimes people say his parents managed the hotels. He also claims his parents owned a theater. Sometimes not so much. Toby sometimes says that the theater was his babysitter, or he says his babysitter would take him to the theater. He says that he would watch 3 films a day, and that he learned the language of cinema before he learned language.
Wow, an artist creating his own mythology.
Yes.
Never heard of that before.
So Toby Hooper, if anything, is a storyteller. I will give him that. But yes, I've listened to countless interviews and commentaries and various things with Toby over the last 10 days. And he says contradicting things, but he maybe is a unreliable narrator in the life of Toby Hooper. Where were we? So Toby Hooper did attend the University of Texas. He went there for film. And he claims that he was standing next to a policeman who was shot when Charles Whitman climbed the observation tower and shot a bunch of people.
60... When was that? 63?
August 1st, 1966. Toby Hooper would have been 23 years old. There was one police officer that was shot that day. So I suppose Tobe Hooper was standing next to him.
Maybe.
So Tobe Hooper made a short film, Heasters, in about 1964. He was going to submit that to the Best Short category in the Academy Awards, but he missed submitting it for the deadline. He made a documentary, A Way of Learning, in 1967, another one, Down Friday Street, in 67, and then he made a film called Eggshells in 1969 with Kim Henkel. Kim Henkel is the co-writer of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Kim Henkel appears in Eggshells fully nude. Eggshells is a film it's about a commune of hippies. It's about soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War. It is very much an art film. It's kind of the in-between. So he makes Eggshells, and he makes a documentary with Peter, Paul, and Mary. Eggshells is kind of the in-between. So you go from Peter, Paul, and Mary to Eggshells to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it's the kind of the bridge and the gap between those. A Song of Love is the documentary of Peter, Paul, and Mary that he makes, 1971. That was financed by PBS. Tobe Hooper claims that he has made over 60 documentaries by this point. Sometimes in Tobe Hooper's obituary, you can see that it says that he, at the time of making Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was a college, or sometimes it says university professor. I will point out that Tobe Hooper never graduated from the University of Texas Film School. Sometimes it says he was working as an assistant film director at the university at the time. So let's get into the creation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Tobe and Kim Henkel had an idea to make a horror film because their other films were not seen by anybody. You can make a horror film cheaply. You can shock people. You can get their attention. So Tobe Hooper says that he was Christmas shopping, holiday season 1972, and he was getting overwhelmed by the crowd of people. Doesn't like Christmas shopping, Michael. And that he was in the department where there happened to be a chainsaw, and his thought was, I could probably get out of here pretty quick if I grabbed this thing and used it to clear a path.
Haven't we all thought that at one point?
Well, except that I love Christmas, so.
Oh, right.
I love Christmas. I love the crowds. Lay it on me. But I understand the angst.
Yeah, so he says that's the original basis for the chainsaw in the film. I have to do my job and point out that Wes Craven made a film called The Last House on the Left, which came out in August of 1972, before Tobe went Christmas shopping. And the climax of the film features a chainsaw being used.
On people?
Yes.
So Wes Craven beat him to it.
Wes Craven beat a lot of people to it. He claims that he got pretty much the whole film came to him at that time. He went home and he wrote it. He claims that he was listening to 2 albums when he was writing the screenplay. Those were Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Elton John, and Berlin by Lou Reed.
Oh.
Not too bad, except both of those albums came out October 1973.
I was just going to say,
so
hold on
maybe
a second.
He listened to those when he was doing post-production, because this film was filmed July and August of 73 before those albums came out.
Maybe.
So, anyways,
this guy's quite the guy.
Tobe Hooper
Right?
is interesting. So Tobe Hooper says, and I don't doubt him on this, and it's sort of a time capsule encapsulation of everything that was going on in the U.S. at the time. Part of the Vietnam War feeds into this. Watergate, the distrust of the government.
But does it really?
I don't. That's what he says. That's what he says was going into. I can see elements of it. Also, he says that sort of the turning on the news and seeing very graphic things, reports from Vietnam, and then these things on the news constantly being like, oh, why are people so crazy? Why are people doing this? Why are people doing that? Killing each other. Meanwhile, they're just showing all of these things and feeding it to us. So he kind of, he says, wanted this to be a sort of response commentary on that.
Yeah, I'm not buying what he's selling.
You're not buying it? I buy it to a degree, so why don't let's get into the movie. Spoiler alert, Michael.
Oh, well, it's okay. I'm not going to watch it anyway.
Okay, so
well, though, I might only because I like the idea of where's my imagination going to go. So I like the fact that, I didn't know, I thought right away you think, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think, oh, blood, gore, right? Not my thing.
Yep.
But if it's more implied, I may. But I'm not even a big horror.
No, you're not. And I will point out also that in the title, chain and saw are two separate words for some reason.
How?
Anyways,
I did notice that.
So the film, so we've got the title, the poster, and then the film starts with the opening introduction, narration of what you are about to see. Did you come across Neil, who is providing the narration in that section?
No, I actually don't know that.
It's John Larroquette.
Oh, jeez.
He reportedly was paid a joint to narrate that section of the film. I just like that I wrote down, because he again, we're keying you in, you're setting the mood. He meant there's the words mad and macabre. He says that they were going for an idyllic summer drive, which when you watch the film, I don't know how idyllic that summer drive was, right? They're complaining about the heat and everything. And then he also mentioned, spoiler alert right there, had they lived, which isn't even a spoiler because Sally does live, and her invalid brother Franklin, he says. And then it will go down in one of the annals of American history. So the introduction, Michael, sort of sets up that this is an account of a true story, which it is not. And the only other film that I can think of that comes to mind that starts off saying this is a true story that is not a true story is Fargo. But
yeah, and it's nothing like the Star Wars scroll.
No.
But I was like, I've seen this before, but this predates Star Wars.
Yes, it does. So there you go, Toby. You can say I did it first. And then we're told that the events take place August 18th, 1973. And then we get a bit of audio, right? There's some digging sounds. There's some sort of eerie sound mixing. And then we get the camera flashes.
In many ways, that was I don't want to say my favorite part of the film, but it was very modern. It reminded me of so many either horror movies or other film, like that opening sequence reminded me of Seven.
Yeah, the opening sequence, especially just that the camera sound, that sound is so great.
Yeah.
Even if I didn't like this film, I would have to say that's the sound design in this film is amazing. And there's eerie laughing, and then we get the radio comes in, and starts relaying information. Tobe Hooper also says that he saw Night of the Living Dead, and that was a big inspiration for this film. And I do believe that, because in Night of the Living Dead, the 68 version, obviously, there's, throughout the film, right, they're relying on radio broadcasts, television broadcasts to tell them what is happening. And the film starts out with the radio, and the radio is constantly just relaying story after story of bad things. I wrote down some of them. So it starts talking about a grand jury investigation. Then it starts talking about a grave robbery as we show what we're getting flashes of, the corpses being mounted. And then it talks about a body being found in the ditch, dozens of empty crypts. Over a period of time, these graves were robbed. And then we go into the credits with the sunspots as the radio continues to relay horrible thing after horrible thing. So again, we're setting them up. This is bad, 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 bad. Everything so far is just bad news.
Well, as someone who traffics in bad news,
dirty laundry.
I would argue, you mentioned the Evil Dead. I mean, War of the Worlds, right? Is a bad news disaster broadcast.
That's what I was thinking when you talked about the radio and the TV broadcast. Right away, I went to like the War of the Worlds, the original.
But the thing is with that, and I felt this watching it, is that, and particularly with the radio, is that the bad news, it's just this voice relaying this otherworldly voice, like where are you? Where are you getting this bad news? It's there's an unreality to it at times. Even as a kid growing up listening to the radio, I was like, well, where is all this happening? Right. I can't see it.
Did you find the sort of the reveal of the corpses in the cemetery? Is that shocking? Is it disgusting?
No, for me, it was more just a context almost for the family.
Right.
Is that it's a bit of a reveal, an early reveal.
Yeah, it's a hint at things to come.
Right.
There's quite a few of them at the start of the film. Yeah. So then we get we're continuing stories about oil units burning and a Texas refinery. There's health officials in San Francisco talking about a cholera outbreak. In Houston, there's an outbreak of violence started by an individual committing suicide when his TV experienced a blackout. There's a 16-story building in Atlanta that collapses, killing 25 people. No explanation, possibly sabotage. And then then we start to get our first images of the actual film while it's telling us about people name and unidentified victims, 2 women that were mutilated. And then we open up with the shot of the armadillo.
Yeah. Which I thought was so clever.
Yes. So Tobe Hooper says that his original idea for the opening of the film was to have a shot of the sun, and then the shot of the sun dissolve, and then it would be dissolving into the shot of a dead dog's eye. That was his original idea, and then he says that he realized that would be too far for people that couldn't see a dead dog. The set designer on the film says that when they went to film that scene, we're at the side of the road, that there just happened to be a dead horse in the ditch. And he thought, what are the chances of a dead horse in the ditch covered in flies? Here you go. It's a gift from the universe to you. And he says nobody in the production wanted anything to do with it. So he happened to find a dead armadillo. He took it home. He taught himself how to, what's the word? I'm not.
Is he a taxidermist now?
Yes, he taught himself how to taxidermy the armadillo. No, this is the set designer, not Toby.
Okay,
He taught himself how to, and he brought it to set. He says that Toby wanted to run it over and have the kids in the van run it over and then come out and the guts be all over the highway. He said, no, you're not running over my armadillo. Toby says that later in pre-production, he borrowed the armadillo and he made that shot in pre-production, which is possible, but you can see the van out of focus pulling up, and the van belongs to the sound operator on the film, so he would have to get the cameras, and this is a production that ran out of money. So I'm calling a little bullshit possibly on Toby's claim that he made that shot and pick up after.
Yeah, and I had read that, again, researching before recording today, that the news segment as the lead-in was to really put it in a context and to make this commentary about all of this bad news and tie it, as you said, to Vietnam and some of the things going on. I would argue what's in the film, and to me the reference to the grave robberies is really just to set up the whole premise that this is a true story, right. Not all of this extended political commentary that I feel is manufactured after the release of the film and the public reaction to it.
Yeah, I think the way that it's mixed too, like the radio is sort of in the background.
Yes.
And up until I watched it this morning, taking notes of what was actually being said, I never really paid attention other than the radio is on. It's saying bad things. That's not really what I think your focus is supposed to be. And then there's, the stuff about the grave robbery, but that's more of like an Easter egg, I would say. Yeah. So then we get the kids pulling up in the van to stop for Franklin to use the bathroom. That, by the way, is the last shot that actor filmed, is him getting out of the van. We can get to a little bit more later, but this is a production, as I said, that ran out of money, was tight on money, so they negotiated with the cast and crew to give them points on the film. So once the film made any money, they would get points on whatever the box office returns were.
Well, that was smart.
Film. Maybe.
I think, now it would have been
as far
smart,
as I know, the only two people during the production that in all of the making ofs said that they got paid during the production was the sound operator, because he let them use his van on condition that he would get paid for it, and Franklin, because he realized he hadn't got paid and he wasn't going for the points thing, and they still had one more scene of him to be filled, this opening scene, and he said, I'm not doing it unless you give me money. So they cut him a check, and he says that in that scene, as he's rolling down the ditch there, his check paid in full is in his pocket.
The introduction of the five characters, and this is where, Terrence, I need to rely on you a bit, because it's the whole cabin in the woods, Scooby-Doo, right? Although Franklin, I would say in this case, plays Scooby. He's the comical character. He's the comic relief until he's not.
Yes, and I think if you watch it too, there's almost a bit, in the introduction we mentioned Sally and Franklin. Those are the only two of the five that are mentioned. But up until a certain point in the film, Franklin has the most screen time. Franklin has the most lines. It's almost like you're led to believe, intentional or not, that Franklin is our main character. And he kind of is until he isn't.
Right, and I guess
But he's not a sympathetic character.
And that's why I preface it as attempted comic relief, because he's not a sympathetic character. He's a little too weird, damaged, quirky.
Yeah, so Paul Partain is the actor's name. He says that Franklin was supposed to be sort of the annoying burden on everybody, and that he went method and was very annoying to everybody on set and cast, and that they kind of shunned him and everybody stayed away from him. But yeah, it's interesting. Watching it and all this, I've questioned, why is he, like, what is the motivation for having Franklin so annoying? And why is he in a wheelchair? Because besides, the only real effect is him being left alone and then him being sort of helpless. And I would say this is an interesting film because you have a helpless male character, and then the first character to get got, he screams in a way that you don't often see male victims scream. Usually it's played for comedy. It's not played for comedy at all.
Yeah, I wondered whether... I guess I just wondered whether it was just almost a stylistic point, putting Franklin in a wheelchair just to show that he is damaged. That the four other kids they're just kids.
Yeah,
they're just hippies, and Franklin has something more wrong with him.
Was he a Vietnam vet?
There's no mention of Vietnam.
I mean, they're hippies, so I don't think any of them would go to Vietnam.
If anything, the putting him in the wheelchair just makes him quite dependent on the other characters, and there's almost a feeling that he's someone told the kids that they had to bring him. The unseen Sally and Franklin parents said, "Well, if you're gonna go out with your friends, you better take Franklin with you."
Yeah. So we're in the van, and then we go to the cemetery, which my reading is that's the whole point, right? Because they hear on the radio that this cemetery where Casale goes looking for their grandfather's grave, right? So I'm assuming that's the whole point of the trip. It's not an idyllic summer drive that they're going to check out. Has my grandfather's grave been dug up? Yeah, so they go to the cemetery, and then there's more of sort of that horror movie cliche, spooky, right? There's the drunk man rambling in the cemetery,
right? The lecherous man who is very happy to help Sally find, because she's she looks good and boobs a bouncing, and he's, let me help you find your grandfather's grave.
Yeah. So then we continue on. Apparently, father's grave or grandfather's grave was not dug up. And then they're driving, and then there's the smell of the slaughterhouse. So there's our first indication of that. They're complaining about that. Franklin is talking about how they slaughtered the animals, how they used to, how they do, how sometimes they would peel off their skin before they were dying, and the use of the sledgehammer. So he brings up the sledgehammer first before we stop to pick up a hitchhiker, because it's very hot outside.
Because what could go wrong?
Yes, and they're worried about him asphyxiating in the heat. So they pick up a hitchhiker. Edwin Neal is the actor who plays the hitchhiker. He was a Vietnam veteran. And if anyone in this film had experienced combat, I would say the hitchhiker is somebody who possibly, you could say, was in Vietnam, has some PTSD. Edwin Neal says that he had family members that were schizophrenic, so that's what he kind of bases his performance on for the hitchhiker. But yeah, the hitchhiker gets in the van, and he starts talking about head cheese, which was the working title of the film originally. And then he talks about, that his whole family's been in meat, and that his grandfather used the sledge, and now they've got that gun. The gun's no good. Puts people out of jobs. The old way was better.
Which leads into, at this point, I'm thinking, okay, the movie's about vegetarianism. Because this conversation goes on, and then there are some shots of the cows standing around in the feed lot, and it's all very ominous, and you're like, okay, this is right. This is an anti-meat, pro-vegetarianism.
It probably
film.
Could still be read like that. So Tobe Hooper says that during the making of this film, he became a vegetarian.
How convenient.
How convenient. It's funny, though, because there's also a story that Toby tells and Joe Bob Briggs tells, because Joe Bob and Toby are friends. Joe Bob Briggs is the host of The Last Drive-In on Shudder. That they tell that there was this film that came to town, Loving Molly. I'm going to get my notes here so I don't get it wrong. So Loving Molly is directed by Sidney Lumet. Stars Anthony Perkins, Beau Bridges, and Blythe Danner. So the story is that the production of Loving Molly came to Austin, to Texas, was filming. Supposed to take place in Texas. The whole point of when Joe Bob tells the story is that they got Texas wrong. They're out interlopers coming in telling they got Texas wrong. But the story is that craft services, there's a hippie come up, and he steals some chicken from craft services. Somebody on the production, producer notices, confronts him, asks him why he stole that chicken. He says, I don't know, just because I could. And then the whole, the punchline of the story is the hippie was Tobe Hooper. So... Here comes your fact checks. Loving Molly was released April 1974. Prior to making Loving Molly, Sidney Lumet made Serpico. Serpico was filmed July and August 1973 in New York, the same time that we are filming the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So, production of Loving Molly would have been after production of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which means if Tobe Hooper was a vegetarian, he was cheating on that by stealing the chicken.
Oh, this guy.
he just
I'm
got...
just like, I keep thinking Trump when you...
There's elements to the film and to Toby. And by all accounts, I will say in his defense, Tobe Hooper seems like a really, really nice guy. And everybody says he's a nice guy. And there's lots of people that defend him. But I can see some of the themes in this movie, some of the things, Hicksploitation this movie could be labeled as sort of being, maybe he would be a red hat wearer.
My takeaway, right, I'm watching the film 50 years after it was filmed, almost 50 years after it was released.
Almost 50 years.
Is that here's a young guy with virtually no money and has got an idea for a movie, makes the movie. And frankly, just wants to get it in front of audiences so he can get paid, right? I certainly, as a viewer, didn't feel that here was an artist trying to give me deeper messages other than to provoke me as an audience member into certain reactions, and then also to show off, like many young artists, their craft, their skill, behind the camera. I mean, there are very good. There is very good cinematography. Although how much of that is Daniel Pearl and how much of that is Tobe Hooper, hard to say. Probably lost in the in the making of and who did what and when. But I guess I was just watching it going, okay, I'm just going to take this for what it is because I'm not feeling all of that.
Right. And if we're going to put it, I mean, context is important. So context of the film comes out in 1974, right? This is a smaller budget, like independent film. Horror by this point had become like the biggest horror films of the 70s are of a certain kind. The studio horror films are pretty much all supernatural horror. They all happen to upper class families, and it's sort of removed from your average audience member, right? So Rosemary's Baby in 1968 kicks it off. And then we have The Exorcist. But again, The Exorcist is a higher class family, right? Chris, the mother, is an actress. And then we have The Omen. Again, I'm pretty sure Gregory Peck is a senator or something in The Omen.
Yep.
So all of these films that are the big budget of making all the money in the 70s are supernatural horror, Amityville horror, Carrie even to a degree, although Carrie is lower class, but we still have...
That predates Carrie, does it not?
Carrie's 76.
Yeah.
So up until, I would say, up until Halloween, which is, you could say, inspired by this, where the horror gets put in a suburban neighborhood by just a guy coming in with a knife because there's not yet any supernatural elements in Halloween, that horror is more of an escape, right? It's not as reality-based as, for the large part, as this film is, which is, I think, somewhat plays into the impact that it had.
Okay, that makes sense then, that it is a reaction and a protest then to what was selling for horror, which, as you say, more supernatural, more, I would say certainly of The Exorcist stylized.
Yeah, I mean, Exorcist came out when this is in production.
Right.
Right? Because this film has like a year-long period of post-production, which is not uncommon for Tobe Hooper. But, right, so they finished filming in August of 73. It's not released until October 1st, 1974.
So but I guess that context is valuable, because then now as a viewer I'm saying here is someone who wants to take a new spin on the horror genre by going against what is selling at the moment.
That's true. I mean, I would say, if for all my Toby bashing, I apologize, Toby fans. There's lots of them. They'll be upset. That Toby, the one thing you can say is he swings big. And so maybe that's because the rest of his career doesn't pan out the way he wants, but he does swing big. Maybe he doesn't have the talent to back it up. But then again, that plays into all this storytelling of Toby, because I get the feeling that he feels like he never got the credit that he was earned. So he's propping himself up and being, look how great I was at this. Look at this thing that I did. Look at this.
And again, I meant to keep going, and then, well, the day got in front of me. I was going to take Salem's Lot and Poltergeist as a follow through, but I ran out of time. I mean, those were highly commercially successful. I mean, Salem's Lot had the Stephen King name behind it, and Poltergeist, Poltergeist is, it's been many years since I've seen Poltergeist. It's almost I would say from my memory of it, is the anti-Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Did he do Poltergeist?
He did.
That's my... If horror movies, that's my favorite horror movie.
So maybe you should give Texas Chainsaw Massacre a chance because it's the same maker.
I like Poltergeist.
But it's so supernatural. It's so... And it's so 80s in that it's very stylized.
So there's a controversial discussion around Poltergeist that horror movie fans get in arguments about, especially Tobe Hooper fans get up in arms about, and that is that Tobe Hooper didn't really direct Poltergeist, that Steven Spielberg did.
Because Spielberg was the producer, correct?
Spielberg was... So should we get into... Should we go
hey,
into a little conversation here on Poltergeist? So
it'll engage Michael because Michael's ears suddenly perked up because
it was one of those ones. I found it spooky and scary enough without having. There's no blood in it.
I didn't know of the background of who actually directed this film. It's certainly Spielbergian in the whole family drama part of it, but I would say it would certainly. Does Spielberg have the chops to pull off the steak crawling on the counter? I'm not so sure.
So let's get it. So the Tobe Hooper defenders, the Joe Bob Briggs, will say that Joe Bob's major point for that Tobe directed it, Steven didn't, is that it was physically impossible for Spielberg to direct this film because he's going out of production of Indiana Jones. And the Temple of Doom. I always get the titles mixed up.
It would be the first one, and Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Maybe it's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Because
Anyways,
I think it came out the year before Raiders.
He's coming from production from Indiana Jones, and then there is Poltergeist, and then Spielberg makes E.T. So E.T. and Poltergeist come out pretty much the exact same time. So his argument is that there's no way Spielberg could go from this to this to this if he was actually the director. Spielberg had multiple times in his career has made more than one film. He made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List famously back to back. He had the highest grossing film of the year and the Oscar Best Picture winner made back to back. He's had Lost World, Jurassic Park 2. He made back-to-back with Amistad. And then he made The War of the Worlds in 70 days and then went into production on Munich and made that one in 60 days. So I think if anyone... Because early on in Spielberg's career, in a film like Jaws, Jaws was way over production, way over budget. Spielberg made it his thing after that he would always come in under schedule, under budget. So let's start with this Poltergeist story. We're dovetailing into the Poltergeist. So Tobe Hooper says that eventually Tobe Hooper signs a deal, production deal with Universal Pictures. So it's a 3-picture deal with Universal's. He says when he's in the Universal's lot, he's in an office that was formerly occupied by Robert Weiss. Robert Weiss, most famously director of The Sound of Music, West Side Story. I believe he was also the editor on Citizen Kane. So Robert Weiss, giant of film, he says that he finds story ideas, rough drafts of Robert Weiss also made The Haunting, Shirley Jackson novel. We would later get The Haunting of Hill House series on Netflix. So he says he finds these drafts, story ideas for this ghost story. He and Spielberg have been in conversation, had been friends for a while, and he suggests that they team up and make this ghost story together. So the story goes that part is true, that they decided they would write something together. They would correspond over the phone. Tobe would give him story ideas. Spielberg would write it out. Spielberg then meets with 2 writers because he's going to make the film that he eventually makes, Always, which I think comes out in 1989. But he talks to 2 writers about making that. They're not really that interested. He offhand mentions that he's working on a ghost story, and they're interested in that. So they write a screen draft of Poltergeist. which will later become Poltergeist. And then Spielberg rewrites it, and then Toby and Spielberg team up. Toby's going to direct, Spielberg's going to produce. Now, there is some argument that there is a impending Directors Guild strike, and that Spielberg is concerned that if the strike happens, he cannot make both Poltergeist and E.T. He cannot delay the production on those films, especially since they both have very young cast. I would like to point out that Spielberg was responsible for casting both films. But anyways, so the story breaks that people are rumors that Toby's not actually directing it. When somebody comes to visit the production, report on the production, and they find Spielberg in the set on the front lawn directing a scene, and Toby in the back directing a scene. So it's, okay, Spielberg's ghost directing this film. And then they have to put out a thing being, no, just on this day, Spielberg happened to be directing the second unit. That's all. Toby's the director. Spielberg's directing the second unit.
Yeah, I mean, and if Spielberg is helping out doing second unit, I mean, good Lord, George Lucas did second unit directing on The Godfather. I mean, these guys all knew each other and liked helping out when they were between things.
And wouldn't Toby have said something?
So eventually, because the studio does get in trouble because the marketing of the film, when we get to that point, is Steven Spielberg's. And they're using Spielberg's name for marketing. So the studio gets in trouble, I think, from the Directors Guild, because they're not giving Toby his proper credit. They're selling it under Spielberg, who is the producer, which is interesting because you look at a thing like Nightmare Before Christmas, sold as Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. He's not the director of that film. So anyways, though, Michael, I want to ask you, what is the job of a director?
Well, to me, the director's job is to guide the actors into. Well, I mean, that's a pretty
bringing the script to life.
Well, yeah, bringing the script to life, bringing the who wants to do the movie, right? So whoever wants to do the movie. I can only think of theater, right? I can only rely on theater. And so theater, it's the director looks at the script and brings that script to life and has a vision for the script and relies on the actors and coaches the actors and gives them as much advice as they are willing to take, and some aren't willing to take any. But that to me is what a director's responsibility is. And all the money and all the other extraneous stuff is the purview of the producer.
So Spielberg in this capacity is the producer. This is, I think, where it gets a little murky. But, I mean, the cinematographer on Poltergeist is a Spielberg person, works with Spielberg, never works with Tobe Hooper. The Jerry Goldsmith, I think, does the music for the film. He says that he never had a single conversation with Toby. It was always with Spielberg what he wanted with the music. The editor says Toby had nothing to do with the editing. There is also reports that the studio locked Toby out of editing, so he couldn't have anything to do with editing.
See, to me, the director and the cinematographer should almost be like synced.
And often they are one and the same.
Right,
Yeah.
and it gets pointed out, so the defenders of Toby will say, okay, you're saying it looks like a Spielberg film, but everything in this era kind of is lit like that, which is kind of true.
Oh, I was going to say the production values between E.T. and Poltergeist are like almost identical. Almost
100%.
Yeah. But that's I think, like you said, that's a product of the time.
There's certain trends that are popular, especially in lighting. Like right now, there's all the dark cinema where you can't see anything on screen.
Can two things be true?
Yes. So here's my belief, just based on all of the evidence. And I went and watched Poltergeist the other day. I believe that they teamed up. Spielberg wasn't confident with the horror elements. So I think the steak that you say, the tree scenes, the clown under the bed, all of those things, the way they are directed, watching it, and I don't this is the other thing people say, well, Tobe Hooper doesn't have a style. His style depends on the film. That's his approach. Those ones, to me, they're shot like Tobe. The beginning of the film up to a point, it seems like, because Spielberg does this thing where he moves the camera a lot, right? And there's a lot early
so does
on
Tobe
in the film.
Hooper in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
We can get to that later. But there's a lot of scenes where it's like right before it gets to the Spielberg part, there's a cut. But there are scenes distinctly that do the Spielberg trick of what so Spielberg uses camera movement and blocking. He choreographs things, right? So it's a no wonder that he finally, West Side Story, directs a musical, because he's been choreographing his camera movement from day one. In Jaws, there's this part where they're on the barge, the ferry, and you have the camera in a set location. You have characters in the background and the foreground, and they move in frame. Or he'll do things where he uses like 20 different camera angles without any cuts. It's just as he moves the camera. So there's a scene in the film, I think her name is Zelda Rubinstein. She plays the psychic that towards the end of the film visits the house. The camera is set in position, and it kind of moves forward as Zelda Rubinstein is moving forward, and then it stops. When it stops, it frames the house with the staircase. Zelda Rubinstein walks up the staircase. Then we have our characters move forward towards the camera, and then they're having a conversation. As they're moving forward, they're in a medium shot, and then they're in a close-up, and then they move backwards, and then Zelda at the top of the stairs enters the frame again. And it's just this way that Spielberg blocks his films that no one else does. The best example, though, I would say, of Spielberg's blocking is there's the part towards the end of the film where they're throwing the baseballs or tennis balls into the closet. The camera starts on a close-up of the tennis ball. Then it pans out. Then we have our characters in the foreground having a conversation. Then they move back. Then more characters. Then the camera goes in towards our characters in the background. And Spielberg always has his camera move in close up, the Spielberg oneer, as they're sort of delivering this important piece of dialogue. And there's 5 or 6 scenes in this film that move like that, and I don't see Tobe Hooper ever functioning on that level.
So that's what I was getting at. Can two things be true? Is that did Spielberg, right? Because of course films are shot out of sequence. Mm-hmm. Is that did Spielberg shoot a lot of the early work, and then was like, okay, I'm running. I have my new motto of finishing under time and under budget. I'm not going to be able to do this and ET at the same time. Hey, Toby, could you finish up for me?
Yeah, I will, because by this point, should we get into Tobe Hooper's filmography?
We should get back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre at some point.
Let's get back there at some point. So Tobe Hooper, his filmography after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he makes this film Eaten Alive, 1976, based on a real serial killer who would feed his victims to an alligator. Eaten Alive is, I'm surprised, I'm guessing because of the Tobe Hooper fans, I'm surprised it's not considered one of the worst films of all time. It's shot on a set. You can tell it's a set. It's a low-budget production like this one, but there's spatial continuity errors, right? The camera breaking the 180-degree rule countless times, as well as just continuity errors, right? There's a dog on one side of the fence, and the next shot, the dog's on the other side of the fence. Things like that. Eaten Live, sorry, there's defenders of it. I think it's an absolutely horrible film. Then there's The Dark in 1979. He's directing that film. He's fired for falling behind schedule. Somebody else completes production. And there's Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot, of course, he completes. Salem's Lot, the budget on that, do you want to guess 1979 TV movie what the budget was?
Probably like $3 million, if that.
$4 million budget for a TV movie in 1979.
And that would have been considered a ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah. So it aired on television, and then there was a cut that was in theaters. The TV cut was 183 minutes, so that's 3 hours. The theatrical version is 2 hours. Tobe Hooper says that his cut was 4 hours. Anyways,
that's ridiculous.
Then he makes The Funhouse in 1981. That film had a $3 million budget, made $7.8 million at the box office. Then there's this film titled Venom in 1981. Reportedly, there's different stories. Toby had a nervous breakdown, or the quality of the film was just plain bad. But either way, he's fired from the production after 9 days. That brings us up to Poltergeist. So I think Toby's MO, and if we're going to dive back into Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Bob Burns, the art director on the film, in the making of Texas Chainsaw Massacre documentary, he says if they had their shit together, they could have made this movie for half the cost and half the time.
It's certainly a very straightforward, simple, and so when I hear that I mean, other than of course the weather, Texas in July and August, what a horrible time and place to be shooting. Although, if you're wanting the cast to suffer,
yes, which apparently Toby says he did want. He's going method that way, but there's stories of, and even Toby tells stories that they would meet in the morning production. He and Kim Wexler would talk about, okay, what are we going to do today? And then they would rewrite the script. At a certain point, producers of the film came in and said, you have to submit us a shot list because this is taking way too long, and you have to follow the shot list. So the cinematographer says that he was given the shot list. He would arrive the set the next day after that mandate, and he set up the shot. Tobe Hooper would show up and say, what are you doing? He says, I'm following the shot list. And Toby said, no. We're just giving that to them to make them happy. We're not following that. I like to go by mood, what I feel on set for that
I am the
day.
artiste.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
So, anyway, should we dive back into the actual content of the film, or?
Michael, you're the producer of this show. How long are we?
We're at an hour now.
Yeah,
we're almost the length of the film.
If you've got somewhere to go, otherwise,
not for another 20 minutes.
In other words, the length of the film. I guess circling back to the film is that I felt that as a viewer that the film finally gets its legs in the very macabre dinner scene.
Yeah. So
and I guess at that point is now I'm feeling the artistry of the filmmaker is in terms of, this is something that I felt having a visceral reaction to, and it was also something that, even though the film is 50 years old, that I've seen before but haven't seen before.
That's true. This film, you can't argue, isn't a heavy influence on a guy like Rob Zombie.
Yes, no question.
Yeah,
no question. I would argue that what is so influential about this film is it's not only the film, is that it goes on to influence pop culture, music.
Yeah.
where of course Rob Zombie would be right the intersection there. But certainly, let's put it this way: I would be far willing to buy that Tobe Hooper was listening to Black Sabbath records when he wrote and directed this, as opposed to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Just for its energy, and really just trying to go for the jugular and not letting the viewer off the hook. And that's what I felt that dinner scene was, is that I am not letting you off the hook. You will watch.
Right.
You will suffer with Sally.
And she really, so if in our conversation about The Shining, we talked about how horrible Stanley Kubrick was for making his actress act. In this film, particularly, I'll point out the part of the film where they cut her finger to feed Grandpa, because that's what keeps him alive, Michael, is the blood. They actually cut her finger in that scene because they weren't happy with the way that the fake blood was looking. So Toby said, just cut her. And that is part of the night that is 26, 27, 36 hours, whatever. Yeah, so like she's really being...
Abuse your leading ladies.
She says the rag that's in her mouth, that they're filming that scene, it wasn't working, and they're like, okay, we need something to shove in your mouth. Somebody just found this dirty rag on the floor without thinking, well, we're going to have to do take after take of this rag that who knows where it was, shoved in her face. And then she says during that scene where she's tied to the chair, there's a part where the hitchhiker is poking and prodding her. She said she fell down, and she says the only thing she heard was, she fell out of the shot. So she was kind of treated as maybe cattle, you could say. But yeah, she talks about that she actually was dragged. She had cuts on her knees when they're, even though it's a rubber hammer where they're hitting her head on, or hitting her in the head with the hammer, they're hitting her in the head with the hammer. She actually had to, she didn't jump through the window, but she had to jump from a point down, so that the shot where she's landing, she says she hurt her ankle, which is why in the scene when she's running away, she is limping, because she's actually limping. And then there's the final shot of the film, and she tells the story that they told her she had wrapped, she's all done, she can finally take off this clothes, because a lot of the part of the film they shot in sequence, because they didn't have the money for multiple wardrobe, so the blood had to be consistent, so you have to shoot those scenes in order. So she said she finally goes, she takes off those white pants drenched with blood and everything, and then she hears Toby tell her that we didn't get it, you have to come back. So she says in that shot where she's in the back of the truck being hysterical, she's actually in the back of the truck being hysterical because she can't believe this isn't over. She's back here doing it again, covered in blood.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to watch it just for the sake.
I think, I mean, Michael is someone that I know is interested in how things are presented visually. I think you will find much to consider. Oh, yeah. Okay. With this film. I don't necessarily think that you'll particularly like the plot, or it's
some of the nastiness is maybe not your flavor.
Yeah, but at the same time, you might appreciate how it's portrayed. I mean, the one thing that I felt that it was really just a 70s Hansel and Gretel. right? Is that
that's what Toby and Kim said that their initial idea before he went shopping for a film was to make an updated version of Hansel and Gretel. And there is sort of that element of we have the boy and the girl going to the house.
Right.
And then we have the boy and the girl eventually going to the house again.
Except that there is no witch. Instead, there are these sinister male characters. And I guess my view of those characters, and of course Leatherface has become this Freddy Krueger, Jason type character, this masked demon. But in many ways, I guess I just found them. You mentioned Hicksploitation. It very much has that the anti-rural, anti-poor. That somehow here are these middle class kids in this fairly newish van, and they end up taking the wrong turn into buttfuck nowhere, Texas, and here we are, and of course X goes down this road as well, right?
Yes.
Of that, kids, if you just stayed on the freeway and just stayed in the city where it's so much safer, there is very much this. I felt certainly this knock on and of course there's this long tradition in America of poor white trash, and certainly the villainous characters in this film are literally poor white trash. It's not. You're not supposed to. It's certainly not an excuse for their behavior.
Right.
But even the gas station owner, complains about the high price of gas.
Yeah, and the cook at the gas station, part of what you're saying, he even goes and tells them. He says, "You don't want to go fooling around on other people's property."
Right.
And
a very Texas style warning.
It's a Texas film. But even in the making of documentary, the cast and the crew will say to them that going from city to city in Texas, that this was something that you were afraid of, that you didn't want to break down in between major cities because God knows who's out there. So
yeah, and I guess I just perceive this as even in the 70s that there was this urban elite sophistication, and somehow the demons were in the wild. Although of course that's a very sort of modern perspective. I mean, in the history of American art and American history, there's always been a fear of the frontier. Right, a fear of once you get out away from the familiar, right, that there's a demon in the woods, that there's a monster in the woods, that the big bad wolf is going to get you. Of course, they brought that with them from Europe, but still, it's so there are lots of touchstones in this film, but at the end of the day, I circling back is and thank you for giving me that context, Terrence, is that now I see this film as simply a reaction to what for someone like Tobe Hooper might have been, horror is getting so stale. It needs to get, let's scrape away the supernatural. Let's scrape away the glossy.
Right.
And get back to something that is far more in your face, visceral, and the film is filthy. It's a very lived in, very gritty, very lived in universe that and everything is decrepit. All the vehicles look like the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, they're all hunks of junk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you wanted to view the film through a modern day setting or apply some of today's issues, like you could say that the hippies are the idealists, right? That they're the ones that are demanding change. They're wanting change, but from what we can see in this film, they're not really doing anything. They're just demanding. And then we have the family, the Sawyers, they're called, by the way, that are victims maybe of change, right? Their livelihood, their lives, they were from from the slaughterhouse has been changed. They've been displaced.
They are the victims of capitalism and improvements to technology. And
we have, perhaps you could say, these two different classes.
Yes.
Going to war with each other. One of them literally eating the other.
Yeah, and there's certainly an ageism as well going on, right? I mean, yes, the hitchhiker is closer to their age, but he is faithful to the family traditions.
Right, it's tradition passed down. Right, the sledge is better. My grandfather used the sledge.
Right,
the new way is no good.
So there's some of that there, but pardon the pun, is it enough to gnaw on to say that, okay, these are the thematic things? I think they're just placed there. I certainly didn't get the feeling as a viewer that Tobe Hooper was trying to make an eloquent statement about capitalism, about power, about technology, the way that, to reference both the book and the film, the way something like American Psycho does.
Right.
Which is quite a bit more blatant in its politics. This is that, okay, there's a little bit of this politics here, but let's not get mired in politics and let's get down to the shit and grit and fun here.
Yeah, I mean, so let's just briefly, context again, talk about just a few small elements that, again, tie in to modern day. So first, though, my question is, do you think that they were actually out of gas, or is he trying to get the kids to stick around because he says he's not, comfortable or whatever with the killing? He's waiting for the hitchhiker or Leatherface to come around to do the killing. He wants them to stay. Or do you think they're generally just out of gas? They don't have any gas to sell?
Hard to say. I mean, he certainly makes he certainly makes it clear later in the dinner scene that he's uncomfortable with the killing. He's all for it as long as someone else does it.
Right.
And that where his involvement is the barbecue making.
Yes.
But the time though, it was the oil crisis, right?
Yeah, so that's what I've got here.
OPEC.
Yeah, it would certainly have been part of it.
The oil and gas crisis, October 6th, 1973, is the Yom Kippur War, 1973. Egypt and Syria launch attack against Israel.
But after principal shooting.
Okay. But... And that's part of this whole energy crisis of the time when the film is being made. There's a gas shortage because of that background.
Yes.
There's an oil embargo on the U.S., right?
Yeah, OPEC was doing its thing.
And then for Fallout, historical context, because I have to, and then we get 1977 is when Jimmy Carter, who his birthday is also October 1st, the same day as the release date of this film, just turned 99. Jimmy Carter creates the Department of Energy. They're responsible for energy-efficient windows. He's telling people to lower their thermostats to save on natural gas shortage, other things that are in the news. Right, he installs the solar panels on the White House. When he does so, Carter says that this could be a road not taken, or it could be an exciting new adventure. And I'm just saying that it seems like with this historical context that we took the road not taken.
as both someone who likes to analyze and talk about art, but also someone who is, my career is mired in current events, is I don't like to over stress the connection, right? Is that, to me, that would be as potentially problematic as sitting around 20 years from now, or a generation from now, 50 years, in terms of something as old as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is that we're looking back and saying, well, all of the films of the late 2010s and early 20s were about Trump and COVID. And so I want to be, I think we have to be careful about linking current events with,
I think,
and that's why I come back to what's in the film.
Right. But I think if you're going to say, compare Texas Chainsaw Massacre to The Shining, I feel like is not exactly a product of the times, right? That's a standalone. Has nothing to do with current events of 1980.
There is an artist, in terms of a director, Stanley Kubrick, who doesn't give a shit what everybody else is doing. He's got a vision. He's doing it.
But I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is more of a time capsule you could use to look at the times. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the U.S. stock market crash from January 1973 to December 1974, the time period of this film where, again, the US, the UK stock market crashes to levels that they don't reach again for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And part of it in the UK is there's this housing crisis, and that the government has to come in, the Bank of England has to bail out lenders. So I just feel like you look at that time and you look at our times, and we haven't really learned. We've been hit in the head with the sledgehammer, but we're still going in that house.
And that's, I mean, that is one part of the film that I would argue does resonate is the technological, the speed of change in technology, because in many ways the kids in their van they're literally out of place.
I mean, it's 73.
Their fashion, their vehicle, their approach is like...
The Hells Angels have already killed the hippies, pretty much, right?
So, but again, I think these are things that we can kind of look back and say adds flavor to the movie. But I think, right, when we look at what's in the film, okay, yes, there's the references to the cattle. Yes, there are references to changing technology. Yes, there's the reference to, rising fuel prices and poverty and isolation. But those
are constants.
But not only those are constants. Is that all of those things have been explored in horror before and since. So now my question to you, because like I said, these are all themes that were explored in previous horror. And certainly in after, is this as much of a landmark film, right? Number one scariest movie of all time, right? Is this really a landmark film, or is this really just something that just happened to land at the right moment in the right way?
I think a lot of this film is... I don't want to... there's very talented people working on this film, but I think there is... sometimes you gotta have luck. I think there is a lot of luck, but I don't know, because you get your people like Joe Bob Briggs, who says, this is the first slasher movie. I disagree with that. But I don't know. I think this is a film that is influential in horror. I think it's a film that stands out because how different it is in horror. But I don't think it's something that pays off in horror until quite a while later, right? I think it's just, if you're talking about from Hollywood's view, it's just, it's an anomaly. It's a one-off. They don't pay attention to it. I think it's the people who in 74 were 15, who in 10 years start making their own films that are maybe influenced by it. But I again would argue that maybe modern day filmmakers are influenced by it more than anybody, because this legend 50 years
100%.
later builds up around it. You have these people reference it. Like, I am a huge fan of this film. I think it's great. I love, despite all the things I said, I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre a lot. But I think it's a thing you can't replicate, you can't duplicate. It's why all the remakes are what they are.
I looking at it, I felt that in many ways, and Michael knows this from many conversations we've had over the years, I always circle back to making musical comparisons. Is I look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre the way that a lot of music and metal fans in particular, and Rob Zombie would probably agree with this, is the release of Metallica's Kill 'Em All, their first album, is that it was so unlike anything else coming out of musically 1982. Everything was so glossy, and here is this album that sounds like it was recorded in a cardboard box. That's how bad the production is on it.
Right.
Yet it has this energy and this drive to it, and I would say in many ways Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974 is the film equivalent of Metallica's Kill 'Em All, is that it just has this, we don't give a shit what's going on, we're angry, we're pissed off, and there's a segment of the population that is really gonna like this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we could draw modern politics into that segment of the population, particularly that's represented in this film, being pissed off and finding someone they think is championing their cause. But instead, I'm going to detour, because I have to, quickly, to Daniel Pearl. So Daniel Pearl says there's 4 scenes in the film that he is responsible for. They were his ideas. Those shots are 100% his. So I want to point those out because I think they might be maybe not 4 of the best, but maybe 4 of the best. He says the under the swing shot was his idea. He came up with that. When she gets off the swing, he's laying on his belly, holding the camera forward, getting slid on a dolly, following her towards the house. That's Daniel Pearl's idea. He says the end when Leatherface is getting upset, throwing a tantrum, and he's got that chainsaw dance. By the way, Gunnar Hansen is Leatherface. Gunnar Hansen was really kind of, okay, this is the end of the film. I'm upset. He's swinging at Toby, because why not? But Daniel Pearl is the one who's like, okay, I got to capture this. I got to get in here. He is the one responsible with Gunnar, I would say, for that scene. There's the scene where they're running in the bushes, and it's tracking along. He says that is his idea. And then he says the scene where they're going back to the house, Sally in the bag, and the hitchhiker is there, and the cook and the hitchhiker, he's kind of beating him in the headlights. He says that shot was designed by him as well. So lastly, on Daniel Pearl, I'm going to point out, because he's made other horror films, but he's mostly worked cinematography for music videos. These are sampling of the music videos he's done cinematography for. Every Breath You Take by The Police, Dancing with Myself, Billy Idol, which that video is also directed by Tobe Hooper. Relax, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Dancing on the Ceiling, Lionel Richie.
Everybody's got to make money.
The Best, Tina Turner, Blaze of Glory, John Bon Jovi. November Rain, Guns N' Roses, I'd Do Anything for Love, Meatloaf, which is directed by Michael Bay. Hot for Teacher, Van Halen. The Rain, Super Duper Fly, Missy Elliott, with his a highly influential hip-hop video. I mean, it's Missy Elliott. And then lastly, Billie Jean, Michael Jackson.
Did he do Billie Jean?
So I think a lot of the success.
He didn't
for
direct
this film,
Billie Jean, though.
No,
he
he's
did
the
the
cinematography.
Right.
Is because of Daniel Pearl. I think Daniel Pearl and Robert Burns, the art director, are responsible for a large amount of the look of this film.
I'll have to check it out.
It's worth a look. Is it something that I'll return to watch again? No. I'm glad I watched it. Thank you, Terrence. Because when you told me to, hey, let's come in and record something about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you remember, my response to you was, this is completely out of my comfort zone, which is why I will watch it. Mm-hmm. And I will talk about it, because it's not a film I avoided. It's just that there was so many other things I wanted to watch. I'm glad I watched it. I can see it's certainly its influence to this day on certain styles of both filmmaking and horror, but as a film itself, is it this, oh my God, no. So I know you love it, Terrence.
Yeah,
I don't love it.
I'm conflicted though, because like I said, I can't help but be a fan of the film, despite everything I know.
Despite its shortcomings.
Despite the fact that, upsetting people saying this, I think Tobe Hooper is not a great director. But, like I used the word luck earlier, I think he lucked into making a great film and was never able to replicate, to duplicate anything close to that. This podcast was recorded in the Arts North studio, our podcast studio, in Studio 2880, Prince George, British Columbia. Thank you again to my guests, Michael Cass and Neil Godbout. If you're interested in this podcast and you enjoyed it, stay tuned for more, or be sure to check out On the Marquee on YouTube.